Alright, this is Coach Schaefer on 2/28/2020, going over our second half of the notes. We're over with scatter plots and trend lines. So, when a scatter plot shows a linear association, you can use a line to model a relationship between the variables. This line is called a trend line. Trend line is a straight line that comes closest to the points on a scatter plot. So a trend line is a straight line that comes close to the points on a scatter plot. So much like this trend line right here. We would call this line, because it comes close to the points, is considered a trend line. We talked about this a little bit yesterday over the three graphs that we made, three scatter plots that we made. You can use 2 points on a trend line to write an equation in slope-intercept form for the trend line. When you use a trend line or its equation to predict a value between data points that you already know, you interpolate the predicted value. When you make a prediction that's outside the data that you know, you extrapolate the predicted value. We'll talk about the difference between interpolate and extrapolate a little bit later in more detail. So for example 1, the scatter plot and trend line show the relationship between the number of customers that enter an electronics store in a day and the number of TVs sold. Write an equation for the trend line. So the equation that we're going to use is a slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. We know m is slope. We know b is the y-intercept. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the graph that we have over here. Easiest thing to find first is going to be the y-intercept. The y-intercept is where the trend line crosses the y-axis. Well, it looks like this one crosses at 0, 0, meaning that my y-intercept then is going to be 0. Then, to find the slope, though, from a graph, we use our rise over run. So we're going to do rise over run. So we need to pick 2 points. So let's start with the first point we have already, 0, 0. Then I'm going to follow the trend line until I encounter another point that's good. So this point right here. So I like that point because of the fact that it falls on the 2 griddable options that we can use. Or falls right on the grid point on one of the intersections. So then we draw our triangle. Like so. We do our rise over our run. So our rise, we go from 0 to 5. So our rise is going to be positive 5. And then my run, we go from 0 to, and then this would be 100 because it falls between 50 and 150. And if we look at our data here, we're going by 50. So 50, 100, 150, 150, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, so on and so forth. So then this would be from 0 to 100, meaning my run would be 100. So then for rise over run, we would say it's 5 over 100. Well, we can simplify that. 5 and 100 have a common divisor. A common divisor would be 5. So we divide the top by 5, divide the bottom by 5. 5 divided by 5 is going to be 1. 100 divided by 5 is going to be 20. So now I know my slope. This is my value for m. This would be my value for b. So then when we plug it into the equation, it would be y equals 1 over 20x. And then since it's just plus 0, we could write the plus 0. But there's really no reason because it's just going to be 0. I'll go ahead and do it though. So plus 0. That is your equation that fits the trend line. Now example 2, there's a little more involved in this one. Marnie recorded the cost of different weights of apples and made a scatter plot of her data. Use the sample trend line drawn in the scatter plot. So what type of association does a scatter plot show? So if we look at it, we're going from 0, 0, and it looks like it's increasing to 1 and something, and 6 and something, and so on and so on. It looks like every single time we are increasing. So if we have an increasing, if from left to right it's going in the upward direction, that type of association would be positive. Now to find a slope, again, we're going to use our rise over our run. So let's pick a couple points. So let's go with this point and this point. So then we're going to do our rise over our run. Now I went from 6 to 12. Again, pay attention to the numbers over here. It's not 1, 2. It's from 6 to 12, meaning my rise would be positive 6. Well, that's going to be 6, and if we look over here, we know it's going to be cost, which means it's going to be $6. And then my run is going to go from here to here. Well, if we look, we go from 0 to 6, and then 6 to 12. So that means that every line is going to be 3. So this would be 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, so on and so forth. So then we started at 3 and we went to 6. So we went from 3 to 6. So my run would be positive 3. Now if we look at over here, we know that that's going to be in pounds. So then I have $6 divided by 3 pounds. 6 divided by 3 is 2. This would be $2 per pound. So that's my slope. Then to find the equation, again, we're going to use slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. If we look at the trend line again, my value for b, my y-intercept, is again going to be at 0, 0. So we already know m is 2. And then we found that b is 0. So then what we're going to do is just take this data and plug it in. So instead of m, we're going to put 2. So I have y equals 2x, and instead of b, I put 0. So I'm not going to put anything there. So that's the equation I need for my trend line. Then, question number 4. What is the meaning of the slope in this situation? Well, we already talked about this a little bit. So again, we have our rise over our run. My y values, my change in y, are going to be the cost of the apples in dollars. And my change in x on my run is going to be the weight of the apples in pounds. So what that means is that my slope, what my slope represents is it represents the dollars per pound. It represents the cost over the weight. So the slope is actually going to be dollars per pound. So when I say my slope is 2, that's what I was talking about. Whereas it's actually going to be $2 of apple. So a pound of apples will cost you $2. Now, for question 5, it's a two-part. So for part A, use the equation of the trend line to predict the cost of buying 5 pounds of apples. So we know pounds is my x value. And we know that's going to cost 5. So I know x is equal to 5. Well, I know my equation is y equals 2x. So what I'm going to do is if I know x is equal to 5, I am going to replace x in my equation with 5. So I'm going to write this as y is equal to 2 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10. So y would be equal to 10, meaning that 5 pounds of apples is going to cost me $10. Now here where question B comes in is going to be a little bit more difficult to explain. So it's asking if it's interpolation or extrapolation. So what we're talking about here is interpolation means that it is a predicted value that falls inside of our data that we already know. Okay? Extrapolation means it is a predicted value that falls outside of the data that we already know. Okay, so what we're doing is we're predicting it because if we look at the graph, it's a scatter plot. It does not mean that there's going to be a linear, it's going to be the same every day, but we can use this trend line to predict what we might sell on certain days, or what we might sell per pound. but it's not a guaranteed every single time. So when we look at this, we know that 5 pounds of apples is going to be $10. So if we go to our graph, we go to where 5 is, so this is 3, 4, 5 would be about right here, and then we would go to where 10 is, and that would be about right here. So again, that's going to fall on our graph, and if we look, that data point is inside of our data, because all of our data is right here. So that data point falls inside the data, meaning that that would be interpolation. Now an extrapolated data point would be a data point that falls outside of the data, meaning it might be somewhere up here where we don't have data for that. So we have all of these points are data that we've collected, but an extrapolated prediction would be a value that we predict that is outside of the data that we've already collected. Does that make sense? So, if you have any questions or anything like that, I'll be more happy to answer them on Monday when I am back in school. Please get this done. Glue it into your notebook. There is a worksheet that you will have to work on as well after this. That worksheet, you can work on it over the weekend, and it will be due on Monday for a grade.